Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Michael with Imperative Finance. So in this video, we're going to be narrowing down the NOI of the real estate pro forma. Now, this is a very important component of the pro forma, but it is only one component of the entire pro forma. So I've already made a separate video covering the entire pro forma from an overall perspective, and now I am narrowing down each of the important topics. If you haven't seen that video, I will link it at the top of your screen right now. I highly recommend you get an overall view and understanding of where we're going before narrowing down each of these topics in detail. All right. So again, with that said, let's hop into the NOI. So the deal metrics are the same. I'll quickly cover it again. Purchase price $200,000, loan amount $160,000. So that gives us a down payment of $40,000. So again, we're going to be looking at today just the first bit of the pro forma, which is the NOI. All right. The NOI is the most important bit of the pro forma, especially if you were the seller. This is pretty much where you stop. But effectively, let's get into the weeds of this metric. NOI, what is this? How do you get it? And let's also discuss what kind of returns on our property we can project at this stage in the game with just this info and the deal metrics above. So with that said, NOI is quite simply your income minus your operating expenses. So the way that income breaks out, we're going to be looking into the pro forma detail sheet now. All right. So I know this sheet looks a lot scarier than the other sheet. It's not actually that complicated, but I do need to go here because we have to make assumptions to get to the values that we're looking at in the pro forma condensed sheet that we were looking at before. All right. So first off, we're going to look for gross rental income. Gross rental income is effectively how much can I charge for this unit, right? If it's a single family house, how much rent could I get out of that unit? Now, usually this will come from the offering memorandum if it's a commercial deal, but effectively you can find your gross rent by looking into the market, getting a good idea, look at comps. I personally, for a single family home analysis, I would put together a simple little rent study and go through, what's the days on the market like, the year, and basically go through like a little comp analysis and get an overall idea of what the average price per square foot is, and then go based off of a number that you feel comfortable with. So once you input the gross rent, obviously this is an annual study on the right here, so we get a gross rent value. Now this is supposed to be your gross market rent. Then you'll see sometimes, especially in commercial deals, you often don't see this metric on single family home deals, but loss to lease is effectively the difference between your gross market rent and your in-place rents. So if you're renting out to a tenant at $2,200, but the gross market rent is $2,400, then your loss due to the lease is $200. So in commercial deals, they will see this number loss to lease and think, oh, that's value, that's money, because once these leases come up, I can increase the rents. Now, you also have to take out vacancy. So in this case, I've assumed 10% vacancy. Why 10%? Well, this basically comes out to roughly 1 month of vacancy per year. And so if you're in a good market, that's a good way to look at that. Now, if your days on the market in your rent study are pretty bad, if you go on Zillow and you're seeing that all these properties are rented out or not renting out, it's taking 60 days on the market or et cetera. If your average is not close to 30, then you might want to increase that, right? If it's a 70-day average DOM, days on the market, then you might want to increase your vacancy. Next up is your other income. So there's two ways that this can be broken out. One is your utility reimbursement. So effectively, if this is the case, then what's happening is that you as the landlord are paying the utility expenses down here in the operating section. And then later on, your tenant repays you that. Other tenant income can also go here. So this could be pet rent, storage rent, detached garage rent, amenity fees, all kinds of stuff. Anything else that's not basically tied to the actual rent itself. So once we know our other income, we can add the total other income plus the total rental income, and we can get to a potential gross income or effective gross income. Then we'll have to subtract out the operating expenses. Now, what are operating expenses? Operating expenses are anything that it has to do with the daily operations of your property. Effectively, everything that's listed here, right? So the way to find out property taxes, first off, it could be listed on the listing itself. They could say that it's broken out into certain things. Now, I will show you, this model is not complete, but basically you have 3 different categories of taxes. You have your ISD taxes, which will be probably your least expensive one. You'll have your city, county, state taxes, which will be your most expensive one. And then you could have other taxes such as different, water district fees or anything like that. You got to watch out for different things and then apply that to your property value. It's based off your assessed property value. So again, this model is incomplete. I'm not looking at that other page. But let's just say that I've assumed the property taxes to be 1.2%. That comes out to $200. And so we're looking at an annual property tax of $2,400 for the first year and increasing by 3% based off of the assumptions we made here. Expense increase percent is a 3%. Now you also have your water, your trash, electric, gas. These are challenging because they will be variable. This is why it's preferable if your tenant pays the expenses for utilities directly. But if it's not the case, then again, you can cover it with this utility reimbursement. Utilities should include water, trash, electric, gas, internet, and HOA. Now, again, gas, electric, water, trash is more challenging because it's variable, but you can very easily find this out based off the listing in most cases. You can get a quote for the internet, and you can get a quote for the HOA. So that's all, when you buy a property, they should be able to tell you that information. Additionally, you have your hazard insurance. So you can call your insurance agent and figure out what it would cost for you to insure this property if you were the owner. That's your hazard insurance. Then you have your mortgage insurance. So mortgage insurance is based off of if you have 20% down on the property or less. If you have less than 20%, you have a mortgage insurance payment. So to get this figure, just call up your lender and say, hey, how much is my mortgage insurance going to cost me if I do this deal? Then you have your repairs and maintenance. So repairs and maintenance is a very tricky topic to discuss. It's not that tricky, but a lot of people get confused on it. Just think repairs, okay? If there's a hole in my roof, that is a repair. If I have to replace the entire roof, that's a capital expenditure. So they're taxed differently. Repairs, OPEX expenses, repairs, maintenance versus CapEx, all right? So this first block here that's above the line, above NOI, is OPEX, or repairs and maintenance. Basically, what you want to do is allocate a certain percentage. So if it's a new property, you can probably get away with 5%, and you're still pretty conservative because if it's a brand new property, you're not going to have a lot of operating expenses on that deal to begin with. Now, later on, you're obviously going to have some maintenance issues. So I would be setting aside money, even though you're not actually spending this money, I would be setting aside money in a reserve account for maintenance expenses. You can put it in the same reserve account as CapEx, or you can put them in separate accounts. But just know that for the lender's sake, they want to see a certain amount of percentage for reserves for both maintenance and CapEx together, right? So if it's together, then you can put them in one account, or you can put them separate and add them up, however you want to do it. Now, I've estimated 5% because this is a brand new property. If it's an older property, you could go with as far as 15% or more. But effectively, what you should really do is go through a in-depth CapEx breakdown, and I'll show you what that looks like here. Effectively, go through your list of capital expenses, the flooring, the HVAC, all that kind of stuff, and determine what stage of the life it's in. So for example, let's say that the water heater is a 10-year lifespan unit and the property is 9 years old. Well, you're probably going to have this expense coming up, but effectively you should do that exercise for all these different components of your real estate and determine what kind of issues you're going to have in the foreseeable future. Do you think you're going to have some repairs or full CapEx expenses? And you can kind of delegate based off of that analysis. Another thing to consider is the quality of tenants. If you're in a lower income household, a lower income neighborhood, then you might have more repairs and expenses coming. Or if it's a younger crowd, perhaps, if it's a party scene, if it's a college town, that kind of stuff. If it's a more modest, older couple, or just more relaxed setting in general, then maybe you'll have less repairs and maintenance on an ongoing basis. Contract services. So contract services can be pest control. It can be landscape fees. Pest control for a single family home can run anywhere from $50 to $150. Landscaping fees, I'm sure that can run just for the mowing, $50. And for actually taking care of the different landscaping, that can get upwards of $100 as well. So you really got to call around, get quotes, and get actual numbers to put in these assumptions. Lastly, if you have a property manager. So property managers will usually go based off a fee basis. You can assume 5%. You can assume 10%, but call around different property managers, see what they charge, and plop that number right in there. So once you have all of your operating expenses planned out, then at that point, I guess we'll stick in this tab, you can get to your NOI. Now, from your NOI, you can get your different property return metrics. So this stage in the game, an investor's not really looking at their true return. Most investors use debt, otherwise known as leverage, and so these returns really have no bearing because if you've noticed, we have not taken debt into account at this point. We're still looking at NOI. With that said, we can look at a few different metrics that are important, especially to commercial real estate investors. So the first one here is going to be your gross rent multiplier. So the way that this breaks out, let me just show you this other spreadsheet that will scare you more than likely. So again, the actual formula for the gross rent multiplier, GRM, is just your property market value divided by your gross income. So once you do that, you get a gross rent multiplier. And effectively, this is just showing you how much gross rent your property produces relative to its property value. So it's expressed as a multiplier. So that means that the lower the multiplier, the more attractive the investment. All right. So for example, if I had, this is 6.72%, but if I had a different property that was bringing in a gross income of, 40,000, all of a sudden that GRM drops. And so that's a more attractive investment to a potential investor. So this is just a simple screening metric. It doesn't take into account debt or any of these other metrics, cash flow, none of that. So it's just, again, a very simple screening metric to get an idea of what the property is doing in terms of its gross rent. Then we can get into the cap rate. So the cap rate is similar to the gross rent multiplier, but it's expressed as a percentage. So this is your NOI divided by your property value. So this is effectively saying if you put all cash in the deal, meaning this is a unlevered metric. So unlevered means no debt. So if you put all cash into the deal, what would my return on investment be? How do you determine a good cap rate versus a bad cap rate? This is where a lot of people get very, very confused. And the reason is because there's multiple ways to analyze a cap rate, all right? If you are a buyer, perhaps, you're looking at two different investments that have the same purchase price, then all things equal, you would want a cap rate that is higher. So you want the highest cap rate possible. Why? Because the cap rate shows you how much NOI I am producing with this property based off its property value. Now, if you're a seller, you'd want the lowest cap rate because that means that your valuation is higher, meaning that you get more money at the end of your sale, right? Once you sell the investment, you'll make more money. So that's two ways that the buyers and sellers look at it. But the problem with the cap rate is that it doesn't take into account lots of factors. Again, debt is not included. It doesn't take into account time value of money. It doesn't take into account depreciation, after-tax figures. It doesn't take into account risk factors. One investment could have a lower cap rate, but is it going to project into a higher cap rate situation, or is it projected to kind of stabilize? Is it already stabilized enough to where the income is not going to be really increasing as much? So it doesn't look at different figures like that. It just gives you a basic unlevered return, and that's it. All right, at this point, we can also look at different loan metrics. So loan metrics are, mainly for the lender, of course. So the debt yield is actually, you could think of it as the lender's cap rate. Effectively, it's the NOI divided by the loan amount instead of the purchase price. So if you have any debt on the property, then your debt yield will always be higher than your cap rate, right? Because the debt is lower than the total purchase price. Now, your debt service coverage ratio is also similar, but it's expressed again as a multiple. So this is your NOI divided by your total debt service. So in this case, we had $17,000 of NOI. You divide that by whatever your annual debt service is. So that would be your monthly mortgage payment of $959 times 12, and you would get a debt service coverage ratio of 1.52. So what does this mean? Well, the lender wants to know that the NOI is covering your mortgage payment, your debt service. So if you're above 1 on a DSCR, you're doing pretty good, right? At least you're covering your payment. But the higher you are, the higher above 1 you are on a DSCR, you're looking good. If you're beneath 1, that's probably not a good deal. You're not even covering your mortgage payment with your NOI, and that is just not a very preferable situation for really any deal. Now, I want to warn you about something that can also come up. The lender oftentimes will actually come down here, and again, this is where it helps to watch the prior video. What the lender will do, and what some people will do in general, they'll throw the CapEx reserves into operating expenses. The argument for doing so is that it is a cost of ownership. It's not an operating expense, but like an operating expense, it's required to own the property. And so they throw it up there in operating expenses. Well, what does that do? That lowers your NOI. So the reason that sellers will never put CapEx up there is because it lowers their NOI. So it's going to lower the valuation that they get if they try to sell the property. But on a lender basis, they want to know that they are completely covered with any loan that they're giving out. So they want to see that the property, whenever they look at NOI, it's their bottom line. So if people are putting away capital reserves, in this case of $2,000 a year, then they want that to be factored into the above the line, they call it, above NOI, because that will lower the DSCR, and it's important for their DSCR metric to see that. So just know that the lender's DSCR might be a little bit lower than the DSCR that you're calculating from your Proforma, because oftentimes as an investor, your Proforma will not have CapEx above the line. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. This is part 1. Next video, I'll be going over part 2, which is the before tax cash flow, and we'll get into these several different return metrics, probably the most important return metrics to look at for any real estate deal in that video. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like down below if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the journey. Leave questions down below if you have any. And with that said, guys, I will see you in the next one. Peace.